All right. Good morning, everybody. Hey, welcome to the MAVEN live stream. We are glad you joined us this morning. In fact, if you are watching on YouTube, do us a favor and in the chat box on the right-hand side, would you just say hello? Let us know where you're watching from. In fact, what we're going to do throughout today's live stream, we're going to give away a couple copies of really one of the best books that I have ever read, A Practical Guide to Culture that my friend John Stonestreet and I wrote. The subtitle is Helping the Next Generation Navigate Today's World, really written for parents and leaders on discipling their kids. So we're going to give away a couple of copies of that. If you're watching on YouTube, just weigh in, say hello, tell us where you're from in the chat box. If you're watching on Facebook, because we're also streaming this to Facebook, if you're watching on Facebook, just say hello in the comment section, and we will choose a couple of winners from those sections. All right, hey, let's get into this. Today, Erin and I wanted to talk a little bit about how moms and dads can partner in homeschooling. And we know that we have, we probably have a mixed audience out there. There's an audience who have maybe been homeschooling for quite some time. And there's an audience out there who have maybe you're in the middle of starting your homeschool journey, or as some people call it, it's not maybe homeschool, they call it crisis schooling. You have been forced into this situation. So we know we're talking to both audiences. And we thought this topic is very timely because Erin, let's start with a honest kind of moment here. When it comes to homeschooling, however it's working out in your home, when it comes to homeschooling, typically moms take the brunt of the workload. Would you agree with that?
That seems to be, yeah, it seems to be the norm. Of course, we personally know some dads who homeschool full-time and moms working full-time. We know there are families that juggle work and homeschooling. So we know there's exceptions to the rule. But yes, majority of time, moms kind of take the brunt, as you call it, of homeschooling, or basically, I would just say they're the ones that make sure it happens.
And now there are some situations, we know some friends, of course, who where the dads are maybe they're full-time stay-at-home dads, and they're taking the brunt of it. Typically, the parent who is not working in a kind of a professional setting is working at home with the kids. But I mean, we know this from speaking at homeschool conventions. A lot of homeschool conventions, you have a majority of moms that are there because they're taking maybe the brunt is the negative way to put it, but the lion's share of the work, or the lioness's share of the work. So we want to talk about how we can partner in that situation. So whatever spouse is taking the heavier load, how do we partner as husbands and wives, as moms and dads? And so I think there's three things that we want to kind of highlight. And then what we want to do is take your questions. So as we're going through these three areas where we can partner, if you have questions that you want to ask, please, in the YouTube chat box, just type out your questions, and we'll get to those. If you're on Facebook, just in the comments section, type out your questions, because we want to spend a good, hopefully 45 minutes or so answering questions after we go through some of these things. We want to interact with you guys and hear what are some of the particular struggles that you're facing when it comes to homeschooling. Now, we share this out of our own experience as homeschoolers. We've been homeschooling our kids for 12 years. You can see who takes the lion's share. She knew exactly 12 years to the date. We've had our kids in public school. We've had our kids in private school, and we've also homeschooled our kids. So we've had a pretty broad experience. So a lot of this comes out of our own failures and successes and stumbling through this and learning as we go. And so that's what we want to share. And I think the first thing that we want to talk about that I think is absolutely vital for moms and dads when it comes to sharing the load is making sure that you share goals. And so this is kind of where you and I need to step back. Moms and dads need to step back from the specifics, the nitty gritty, the down and dirty, the details. And what we have to do is we have to step back and we have to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to our goals for our kids. And I would say even our larger goal. Like, so when you think of your kid leaving the house in 18 years, what's your goal? What kind of child, or ultimately by that point, what kind of young adult do you want to cultivate in your home? And so, of course, as Christians, we would put it pretty simply, we want to cultivate faithful followers of Jesus Christ. I mean, that's kind of the long-term goal. Now, under that larger goal would be then 4 other areas that we've kind of hashed out. We would divide that into kind of spiritual goals, intellectual goals, moral goals, and then psychological or emotional goals. So when it comes to like the spiritual, we'll just share some of our goals to kind of help you see what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I do think this is important to have a discussion about actually, and then it ends up being a continual discussion between husband and wife, because what our goals are helps to inform what we do on the daily basis. So we want to, as parents, kind of run to how on earth do I do this? Raise kids, do their education, whatever the question is. Just tell me how to do it. But I think knowing what our goals are and coming together in agreement on those things is so vital, because then it's what hashes out every day, and it's how you interact with each other every day. It's whether at the end of the day we feel like, wow, this was really a waste of our time, or this was hard, but it was good. And it helps you to evaluate as parents, are we doing what is matching up with what we're saying we want for our kids? So all of that to say,
ultimately, this gets into the practical.
Yes.
So starting with that high-level view, what your ultimate goals are, will eventually work its way into the practical stuff.
Yeah.
So this isn't just, this is some kind of thought experiment, but I want to know, how do I do this day in and day out? This will actually affect the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, and I think it helps you get through the day-to-day, I would say, too, of just feeling like maybe you didn't do that much in a day, or whatever. Just again, as you because we do this, we evaluate. We're constantly evaluating all the time, and so if we have a good mindset of what we're doing, and if we're in unison in that mindset, then when I'm frustrated or feeling like this isn't working, then you can come in and either encourage me in that, or say, well, hey, this isn't actually a value of ours, so let's figure out how to do this better.
Okay, so let's take that first goal. Why don't you jump in here? So we've got kind of this a spiritual goal for kids, and for, I guess let me say this also. I think part of your goals too is figuring out what is education. And we're not going to talk a lot about that. You and Cindy talked about that on last week's live stream. But really, our view of education is that it's formation of the human person, and ultimately in accordance with how God has designed us. So we have a Christian worldview. Start with a Christian worldview of education. And so maybe that's one place that moms and dads have to start, is by saying, hey, honey, what do you think education is? And you might realize, I really actually haven't carefully parsed that out. And so that might be one of the steps here, is to say, okay, I need to think through, what is education from a Christian worldview or from a biblical worldview? What is education? What are its ends and goals and all of that? So we're kind of operating off of that. So that's where in homeschooling, the spiritual component plays a vital role.
Yeah, and whether you're a homeschooler or you're doing school at home right now, because of the pandemic, either way, you can bring in the spiritual into your thoughts of what education is. And we want to, as Christians, think carefully about this question, because we don't want to just adopt the secular view of what education is. Because the Bible's so clear about what parents are to do with their kids, and it's not just math, and it's not just worksheets, and it's not just getting an A in a class and checking off a box. And so if we find ourselves falling into that, we need to remind ourselves of truth. And so, it's an important place to start. So, Cindy and I talked about it last week, and if you want to hear a little more on that, then you could watch the live stream from last week.
So, so to our goals, so we've got them broken into these 4 categories. Spiritually, we want our kids, really, I think Matthew 22 would be the goal. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So the idea there that Jesus is communicating when he gives us the greatest commandment, right, is that we love God with all that we are. So love often gets reduced to some kind of experience or emotional response. For us, love is holistic. It includes that. So we want our kids' affections moved toward God. But we also, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your mind. And so the intellectual actually plays a vital role in their spiritual development. So I think for Christians, the Christian worldview demands that we don't make this false separation between their academic work and their spiritual life. It's all part of the whole package. And so when it comes, and I would actually, so that for us, I would say these other 3 areas really kind of almost are subsets of kind of the spiritual, or that larger goal of helping to develop and cultivate faithful followers of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to jump in and say,
go ahead.
I think this, we might all say that this is true about what we want for our kids, but I think sometimes even I think we undermine ourselves in a couple ways. One, I think even sometimes the way we talk about it. So we'll talk about school as sometimes the highest priority for our kids. We'll put it above family time. We'll put it above church sometimes. So even though we might say, yes, we value the spiritual most of all, I think with our kids and how we're living that out on a daily basis, is that the priority of our day, to study the Bible, to be a family that prays, these sorts of things? Or are we communicating, for example, we could do a Bible time together and then say, okay, guys, now we gotta get going on school, or now we gotta start doing this, as if you weren't already engaging your mind and doing school, or doing things that are feeding your soul already. And I can fall into this too, and even how we talk and say things, I think, and prioritize our day. There's all kinds of things that we can do that undermine this idea that the spiritual lives of our kids is really the most important thing as a believer. So
secondly, which again might be a subset, we would say we have intellectual goals for our kids. And so let me just lay out a couple of those. Number one, when our kids leave our home, one of the intellectual goals we have for them is that they would love reading, that they will have read many, many books by that point, that they will have not only read those books alone, but also with us, and that they would, by the time they leave our house, they would love reading. So now, okay, so there's our high-level goal. You can see how that's gonna play out practically in our family. So we, number one, have books all over the place. Because that's a high value. We want our kids to be surrounded by books. We want them to be familiar with books. We do reading with the kids every single day. So part of our homeschool day is going to include some kind of reading, whether that's us reading to the kids reading on their own, or maybe the kids listening to an audible book. That is a huge value for us. And so on the intellectual side, reading is a key goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this can be, of course, we have 5 kids that have different personalities and different loves and interests. So it's not as if we think, all of your children are going to run to books for their free time and that sort of thing. But it's cultivating just a natural love and affection for books, for good stories, and that would be something, even if they're not, because of course there's some of our kids who it's very easy for them to sit down with a book and read for hours, because they're just those kind of kids that's easy to concentrate on one thing at a time. But when we read with our kids, especially the ones who are more reluctant readers, we help to cultivate this love of books, of good stories. You want to expose your kids to good stories. And so as they're growing and living life and learning, they're seeing that books are such a great source, not only of knowledge, but of beauty too. And it's where we learn about what's good and things like that. So yeah, loving reading is a value we want our kids to have, because then when they leave our home, we know that the world is open to them, that there's nothing they can't learn, that there's nothing they can't grow in, because if they love to read, if they love books, and they know books are an awesome resource, then there's no stopping them. And
well, yeah, and I think that ties into a kind of a second goal that we have under their intellectual development, is a love of learning, and fostering a love of learning. And there's different ways, I think, that we cash that out further. Certainly, number one would be connecting learning back to God, right? So that they, and this really, this reminds me of, the university system. Of course, the university is a Christian invention. It's a Christian creation, right? Christians who saw all of these diverse areas of study out there. So you can study psychology, and you can study medicine, and you can study law, and you can study social science and politics and English, right? You've got all these diverse fields of knowledge. Well, are they unified at all? And Christians said, yeah, you can get unity in that diversity. That's where we get university. The unity comes because theology, or the study of God, was the queen of all the sciences. That was the terminology they used, the queen of the sciences. It was the idea that theology, or the knowledge of God, is what unites all of those areas. And so that's a proper understanding of knowledge and of the intellectual side. And so for us, it's very important to connect the academic, the intellectual, with God. And so that's why we do, theology is an important part of our studies. Reading through Scripture, understanding the nature of God, doing apologetics, learning how to defend the faith, learning how to reason through your faith. All of that is important for the academic, if you will. That's important to studying math. That's important to studying these other areas, because it will bring a coherence, or it'll what that means is that it'll make sense of everything. It'll give you kind of the big picture and make sense of the details, right? I think so often kids hate learning, or their motivation is stripped away because these pieces, these subject matters are so disconnected from one another. And so it's just learning math ultimately so I can complete this test or complete this requirement. And I think that is one way that we end up stripping our kids of the love of learning. And so we want them to walk out of here with a love of reading and also just a love of learning and valuing knowledge, and ultimately connecting it to God. Because like you said, if they love to learn and they love to read and they have some aptitude in that, then they can learn anything. We don't have to then feel like, well, we have to teach them every single subject. We've given them maybe not the knowledge, but we've given them the tools to gain the knowledge, right? And this goes back to kind of Dorothy Sayers' essay, The Lost Tools of Learning, right? One of the things that's missing in a lot of modern education is giving the kids the tools of learning. And so this is what we're thinking about as we lay out our goals. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is give you examples of how we're cashing this out, because we think this conversation is the kind of conversation moms and dads have to get on the same page. All right, so let's move to the moral. What goals do we have there, honey?
Wow, those are big goals. So yeah, we want for our kids in the moral area to want what is good, to train their affections towards what is good. And I think we can do this in a lot of ways. A big part of that, of course, is exposing them to God's word, to teaching them God's word. It's also through, again, reading good books and training. You train their affections towards what's good by putting in front of them things that are good and true and beautiful. And so in that way, yeah, we have a big goal, not that our kids be good, but that they want what's good. Excuse me, that they want what's good, and that they're pursuing goodness with their lives.
So when it comes to morality, we're thinking of what are the virtues that we want to develop in the kids? What's the character we want them to have? And this is I think this is really important, because in modern culture, in Western culture, we have really lost the idea that morality is a source of knowledge. Morality turns out to simply be a preference in most people's views. You got your preferences, I got my preferences. You got your favorite flavors of ice cream, I got my favorite flavors of ice cream, right? And so schools then don't see morality as an area of knowledge, and allegedly say they don't address that. You can't be neutral on these things, but and so there's certainly moral education that's going on. But that's what we want our kids to learn, is that there's moral knowledge. There are true virtues. There is a sort of character and a virtuous life that you want to aim for. In fact, that will play into your intellectual development. That feeds. In fact, you see this in Scripture, is that there's a connection between morality and the intellect all the time. I just think of Romans chapter 1. Verse 18, Paul says, we suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And you see the connection between the suppression of truth and immorality. We will deny true things from a moral motivation. And so this is why this area is so important. And so as we kind of cash out the goals in terms of their moral development, we think about just the different levels of moral development. And in those early stages, young children, elementary age kids, for us, the emphasis was a lot on kind of protecting them from moral corruption, right? That's a huge role that we play as parents. Now, that's not our long-term goal. That's our short-term goal. We want to protect them from moral corruption, like I think all parents do. We want to protect them in different ways, and how that you cash that out is going to be different for each family, but there's an appropriate level of protection so that we can teach them the good life. We can teach them what is good and right. And then eventually have them venture out and then live in a morally corrupt world, a fallen world, where then they are equipped with the inner moral strength, because we've got to teach our kids virtue, because eventually they're going to be out of our homes on their own, and mom and dad's rules are no longer going to be there trying to keep them in line. Well, what is it that will keep them following God and his commands beyond our house? It's having inner virtue, inner strength. And so the moral component is a huge component. And I think, okay, now just to kind of get down to the practical, I think sometimes one of the ways that we partner is because Erin takes the lion's or the lioness's share of the homeschool work. Sometimes after my work day, you will be in conversation, and you will share with me your frustration that you didn't get this accomplished, or you just felt like, you're struggling with this academic subject with this kid, and you share that frustration. And one thing I'm able to do is help encourage you, because you've been in the weeds all day, you've been in the details. I'm able to help encourage you, pull you back, and say, okay, remember, what are our larger goals? So even though maybe you didn't get this particular thing done that you wanted to get done, remember, there's the academic, the intellectual is one component. Mm-hmm. Well, morally, what were we able to do? Mm-hmm. And for, let's see, our 8-year-old son, having him here in the home, we were able to protect him morally to develop his character. And so that's why it's so important to set out those goals.
Yeah, and when they're young, of course, a lot of the moral training it comes in the way of discipline. Discipline, again, you're exposing them to the good, but your discipline is a big part of giving our kids moral instruction. So that's a topic for another day, discipline, but I do think this is where discipline comes in the area of moral training. So if I have had a day where I feel like a lot hasn't gotten done because the kids were fighting with each other, or someone was just struggling with disobedience that day, when we're reminded of what our goals are and that the moral is a component to what we're teaching our kids, well, then you realize a bad day is a day where you were helping to instruct them on what is good. It's a day where you were teaching them to use self-control, or to put others before themselves, or to do something they don't want to do, even because they're tired or being lazy or whatever. And so this is all this encompasses what we view their education to be. So a day that's spent disciplining and dealing with conflict or sinfulness is not a day that you did nothing. It's a day that was maybe focused more on this one area for good reason. So.
Yeah, okay, so that's the moral, and then the psychological. We just give you some examples, kind of psychologically or emotionally. That's an important part of human life and the human person. So there's a couple of things that we put under this one in terms of our goals. One would be like conflict resolution, right? Learning to deal with conflict is a absolutely vital human skill, and we think that this, for our kids, the best context is actually learning that in the home at first. Now, it doesn't mean they won't experience that elsewhere. They will, but we want them to learn how to deal with it in healthy ways, mm-hmm. how to not avoid it, how to confront it, but confront it in the proper way, mm-hmm. how to walk through that mess, develop the kind of the emotional strength to be able to deal with conflict. So that's one of the things we would put under that. And And at this point, we think the younger kids learn that better with mom and dad versus their peers, you know. Another goal under there would be, for us, would be socialization, which is often, of course, a criticism that's leveled at homeschooling. But we've heard some stories from folks who have, their kids are in private or public education, who have had their kids home and have expressed surprise at how much they've enjoyed it. Maybe you're one of those individuals who you've had your kids at home in this kind of crisis schooling, and after a couple of weeks, maybe you've noticed almost like a detox in your kid, where you maybe have seen a better attitude or a brighter disposition or things like that. And I think you might see some of the results of detoxing from so much peer-to-peer interaction. Mm-hmm. I mean, think about it. If you put a young person in a context where for 6 to 8, maybe even 10 hours a day, they are surrounded by peers who are often being shaped by pop culture, who are maybe narcissistic, and they're in that context, that's going to socialize them. It's going to socialize them to those kinds of things. And so one of our goals for our kids is that they would develop into emotionally healthy and mature adults. And that kind of socialization happens by other adults, primarily. They get to, the healthy parts get to be modeled. And so that would be another goal. And there's a lot more to talk about there.
Yeah, one mom mentioned that she had thought that her kids really couldn't spend that much time together because they were just constantly arguing or in conflict or whatever. And now they've been forced at home. All extracurricular has been taken away. And now they're, quote unquote, stuck together, right, all the time. So what this has forced them to do is work out their conflict. And now the mom, to her surprise, is seeing the siblings get along better than they ever have their whole lives, because now they've had really, I think, the time and been forced to work out these things because they don't have anywhere to escape to. They're not going to these different places and having different social and emotional experiences. Now they're together and they're having to work out their conflict. Now they're working it out and learning to get along. And that's a plus to this whole thing, I would say, is that it's showing parents that as a family, we can work together and work some things out that maybe before this happened, we didn't have the time to do it. We were just too busy running here and there, and it's easy to avoid it and put it off and not deal with it when you do have other things going on. Now we don't have all those things going on. And so even in our home, we have had some weeks here where we've been dealing with things that we were a little too busy to deal with before, and it's been good. It's been good to be forced to work things out together.
All right, so let me pause here and kind of relate this to our theme here. We're talking about how moms and dads can partner, and we're saying the first step is to really step back from schooling and from education and to say, what are our goals? And to divide those into the categories that you think are best. And ultimately, I think, from a Christian worldview, the end goal is the formation of the whole person. So for us, school isn't just the academic. It's not just the grades, the GPA, the SAT, the ACT, those things. Those things are important. I'm not saying those aren't important, but those are part of a larger picture. And one of the ways that we've communicated to our kids the larger goal of ultimately loving God with all that you are and following Jesus faithfully is by, telling them things like, if you go to college and you're successful and you get your degree and you get your MBA at Harvard and you're at an Ivy League school or whatever, and you have all this academic success, and yet you've walked away from the Lord, or you're lukewarm as a Christian, or you've fallen away, or you're corrupt and you've gone the way of the world, Well, we would not be satisfied with that. We'd be more satisfied if you never went to college and you were working as a clerk at the local convenience store and you loved Jesus with all your heart, soul, and mind. Right? Now, again, we're not saying that those things, that high academic achievement and loving God are mutually exclusive, not at all. But we're saying, given our end goal, this is more desirable than this. And so as moms and dads partner in homeschooling, whether you're full-time homeschoolers or whether you're new to this, one of the things that moms and dads have to do is step back and lay out the goals. Make sure you're on the same page, because what this will do in terms of the day-to-day stuff is, number one, it'll put you on the same team. Like, that's one thing that I think over time is really, there's been a convergence of you and I being on the same team for these things. So we're kind of one mind, and that unity is absolutely vital and helps us to avoid conflict or work through, maybe disagreements, kind of going back to our larger goals. So it puts you on the same team, and then it provides then the context, the proper context for which you're educating your kids. Now, so I would encourage moms and dads to maybe carve out an hour or so to have this conversation, at least to begin the conversation. This is an ongoing conversation. It's something we've developed over time, but at least to say, okay, what are our goals? What are the categories that are important in terms of education or the formation of our kids? And then what you'll see, like, notice in our intellectual goals, test scores are not on there. Because I don't think at the end of the day, test scores are the final measure of whether or not our kids have succeeded intellectually, right? So we don't have this high value. Now, again, I'm not saying good test scores aren't good. We certainly, those can be an indicator that our kid isn't putting the effort in, right? So there's a proper view of that kind of thing. But if my kid doesn't end up with a 4.0 GPA and a perfect SAT score, I'm okay with that, because that's not in part of my goals here. And so that's how it will really practically play out. So if moms and dads start by getting on the same page there, that's going to then lead to a good partnership.
Yeah, I think the question of assessment, how do we assess our kids, is a really good one to talk about, because you may not be on the same page with each other on that. And if you think that the best assessment of where your kid's at is test scores and things like that, and the other spouse doesn't, well, then that's going to be a conflict. And so talking about this idea of assessment and how we really do that well for our kids is an important thing to talk about.
Yeah, when I did a master's degree in philosophy at Talbot School of Theology at Biola University, and it is a very rigorous program. It's high-level philosophy, and I got to study under a guy like J.P. Moreland, and who's a top Christian philosopher, brilliant guy. But I remember in my classes, J.P. saying things like, you're I don't care about your grades. I don't care about how you do on this test. And he would say things like, life's too short to care about such trivial things. He was interested in us learning and growing in our knowledge. And so that provides the proper context. Okay. All right. Let me pause here and encourage you, if you're out there watching, as questions come up, please type those questions into the YouTube chat box, or if you're on Facebook watching, type your questions into the Facebook comments. In a little bit, we want to deal with some of your questions and interact with you guys on some of the challenges of homeschooling in this particular moment, homeschooling as mom and dad, partnership, all that stuff. So go ahead and be typing in your questions. We're going to share two more points that we felt we spent the most time on. That first idea, getting on the same page with your goals, because we think that we've seen just how that has really helped us to partner in homeschooling and to share the load then. Now we've got goals that whether or not Erin's, or I are doing most of the work, whatever spouse is doing most of the work, you share in those goals, and that alone creates such a psychological boost and an emotional boost as you homeschool your kids. All right. Now, then that leads to the second key way that parents can partner is that now that you've got your goals, and of course, for those of you who are doing some of the crisis schooling where you're having, your school assign certain things, you're going to have to, work through that, and you're going to have to work that into your school day and into what you do. But let me just say this. I think this is a great opportunity for moms and dads to be evaluating. Like, if your goals for your kids, in your view of education, as you get that down on paper, as you really cash that out, you might be able to then look and do a comparison. Okay, is how we're schooling at this present time, does it match up with our goals? And you might see there's a disconnect. Or you might say, no, actually, this is confirming, this is helping us, the way we're doing school now, whether it's public or private or homeschool, is helping us to get to these goals. So it's a great opportunity in this moment to evaluate your own education of your kids. Okay, so then that leads us to the second key point, and that is the idea of sharing the load, figuring out how we're going to share the load on this.
Yeah.
How do we share the load, Erin?
Well, again, if the picture of educate, this is why it's important. If it's big, then even though I'm at home, in our situation, I'm at home schooling the kids during the day. If your picture of education is big, then what you're doing in the day isn't the end, and the other spouse can be involved in all kinds of things that aren't necessarily the concentrated time of maybe sitting at the table and going through our lessons that we have to go through or reading the things we have to read. But so sharing the load you can broaden your picture of that just by broadening your picture of what education is. Because, for example, like most homeschooling people are the moms doing the lion's share of it. So when dad comes home from work, maybe that day, then maybe dad can take on the task of making sure chores were done. Maybe kids report to dad about their chores. Well, because work is a part of our big picture of education, what we want. And so dad can be involved in all kinds of things and can make mom feel like, oh yeah, we're sharing this load. Even though I may be directing most of the things during the day, we're a team, and different aspects of it you can take on too. I'm not the only one who's educating our kids. It's both of our jobs, and the picture of educating is much bigger. So when the kids are out doing yard work with dad, that's part of their education. It's part of their development. So it's not just, oh, now I don't have the kids and dad's doing something with them. It's, no, dad's taking on part of the educating of our kids, and the picture of it is much bigger. So I think maybe just agreeing up front, hey, we're in this together. I'm not the only one who's responsible, even if I'm the one who's kind of making sure things happen during the day. We're in this together, and there are things that we can share in this journey. Yeah,
and that, I think, we didn't mention this in our goals, but yeah, developing a work ethic in our kids is part of one of our goals, and that probably falls under the moral category in terms of their virtue. Having a work ethic, serving others, being selfless, those kind of things. So for us, when I'm working full time as the president of MAVEN. Of course, you are doing stuff with MAVEN as well. When I get home from work, so to speak, or when I'm done with my work, I work at home a lot. When I'm done with my work, it doesn't mean I check out. No, I'm sharing in the load, the workload at home. And I think sometimes, here's my view as a dad who works. I don't think, well, I go to work and mom stays at home, and therefore when I come home, I'm the one who's tired and I'm the one who needs a break. No, I realize I've been working and my wife has been working as well. And in fact, being home with 4 kids is almost always more emotionally taxing than what I'm doing. So I can expect that maybe she'll be more tired than I will be. So I don't just come home with a mindset, oh, I get to kind of go on cruise control at that point. In addition, I think seeing, as you hear our view of education, I mean, we would say really life turns out to be education. All aspects of life become, ways to form the human person. So just because they've gotten whatever academic requirements done, say they've got their math done and that kind of stuff, doesn't mean the learning stops. For us, the dinner table becomes a place of learning. It becomes a place where you learn to serve one another. It becomes a place where you learn how to work. And so after dinner, so oftentimes I know that Erin has been spending time all day in kind of the homeschool day directing the kids. And that tires you out, constantly telling and giving instruction and asking kids to do this and then trying to motivate them to do those things. So I'm in the mindset, and this is one of the huge ways I think we partner, is that when I'm, at dinner time, after dinner, after we're done kind of fellowshipping and hanging out and talking as a family, when it's time to clean up, I will take the lead and start directing the kids. All right, hey, everyone needs to, get to their chores on this, and the kids have their assignments in terms of who's washing dishes, who's hand washing, who's loading the dishwasher, who's wiping down the table, who's vacuuming the floor afterwards, all of that. And we often actually tell mom, we tell her, hey, mom, you don't get to work at all in this. You've been serving all day. We don't want you doing the dishes after dinner. You often are you're the chief, the head chef in our family. So, mom, go sit on the couch, get a book, relax, go outside on the patio with a cup of coffee or whatever, relax. And I will take kind of that burden of then directing the kids on that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the ways I think that you can share the load, is just kind of by, if you're the spouse who's out working all day, coming home and then stepping into some leadership. Mm-hmm. And now this is something that moms and dads have to work out, because it could be, and this is where you got to get on the same page, but it could be, you want to talk through what that looks like, mm-hmm. because that could create conflict where if dad just comes and says, all right, I'm taking over, right? It's got to be an agreed upon thing. Mom's been kind of in the mode of I'm in charge, and then dad just jumps in. Yeah. That has to be something that you work out.
I think again it comes down to communication, but talking about what do you need when I come home, or you've been doing stuff all day. So how do we work together to make it through the rest of the night, get kids to bed successfully, and hopefully have some time together at the end of the night. So at different stages, this has looked different. So now we have kids that can do dishes, and I can go and sit. At the stages where we had little kids, it was often you saying, okay, do you want to do dishes and I'll do baths? Do you want to do baths and I'll do? And so it's figuring out, okay, how do we work together? But just that conversation of, yeah, you're not checking out, you're not feeling like it's my responsibility to care for the kids, that we're at a team in this, is really helpful. And some nights I would say, I'll go do baths if you do dishes, vice versa. Or can you just do baths, reading, everything, get them to bed. I'm happy to sit at the sink and do dishes. And then, as they get older, you really making sure everyone's pitching in and working has been really, and it's these little things, right? It seems so little, but it actually communicates a lot to me, of the reminder of like, oh, I'm not in charge of raising the kids by myself. This is actually something we're doing together.
Yeah. One of the real practical things we talked about that we've done that I think has helped us in this is we try to meet once a week and do calendars together. So we learned early on in our marriage that there were kind of these train wrecks that led to a lot of conflict. Mainly because of Erin, but we realized, okay, we got to get on the same page. So we would meet together and once a week, scheduled meeting where it's on the calendar, just like if I had a meeting with, some other person, or Erin had a meeting with some other person, we kind of keep it at that level of importance, put a meeting on the calendar once a week where we would go through finances and calendar. And that calendar part is really helpful with homeschooling, where we can kind of map out the next week. Sometimes we'll just go 1 week out, or we'll go a couple weeks out. Sometimes we'll cover a month to see, Erin will help me get on the calendar. Hey, here's this field trip that we're doing that's coming up. Or hey, on this day, when you're at home, can you do logic with Ella? And schedule that in, or things like that. And so then that helps us to really, it's a very practical way, share the load where they're, I know that Erin's doing so much, so I want to know how I can contribute more. And so when we do our calendar, that's a real practical way that we're able to share the load. And that has been huge, I think, for us in terms of just practically for our marriage, for raising kids, is just having that weekly meeting and planning kind of life together.
Yeah, it's helped to avoid a lot of arguments. Of course, sometimes we've done calendar and gotten in an argument while we were doing calendar, but it's so important to do because you can look back at the week that just happened and either say, okay, this was a disaster, and so we need to plan in more of this or get rid of that, whatever. But then looking at the week ahead, I do think weekly so important because it's like you're getting a pulse of things on a regular basis. Even if you do look ahead a whole month and say, hey, when are we going to plan some date nights? When are we going to do this or that? So that's important too. But the weekly is really important. And I know even just for our marriage of saying, you saying, hey, I have a lot of deadlines this week or whatever, I'm going to have a really busy week. So then I can adjust my expectations of what all you're going to be able to contribute and vice versa. Maybe one of our kids is really just struggling or I'm having a difficult time with. And then doing calendar, I can say, hey, why don't you take this kid on a date this week and take him out and have some intentional time with them? Or maybe I need to do that, and so we can schedule it. So you're able to plug in the purposeful things that you want to do. And even looking at a day, this day is going to be crazy, so the next day we should probably leave in some gaps for rest or whatever. So it's been such a good discipline to be a part of our marriage. Of course, we've had times where we're better at it than others. When you're traveling a lot, it's harder to sit down and have those times where we're meeting and getting on the same page. But that's what it ends up doing is it helps us to get on the same page. It reminds me we're on the same team and that we're working towards our family's stuff together, that I'm not isolated, which oftentimes, when you're home more doing the things all day, you can start to feel isolated.
Yeah, and also what it does, it just facilitates conversation between mom and dad. Mm-hmm. So even if Erin's the one who is kind of in the nitty gritty most of the time, the fact that we have this opportunity to talk through details, bounce ideas off of each other, for me to encourage her, that alone is a very important way for us to partner, is just by talking through some of that stuff.
And for me to listen to your input too. Oftentimes when I'm doing things, a lot of the stuff directing, maybe is a good way of saying it, then I have my perspective. But when we talk, it helps me to value your perspective. I'll talk about a situation that's this kid, I'm having this issue or this is going on, and then you're able to add your perspective, and it helps me to listen to that and respect it. And that's valuable for me too. Again, it's the reminder I'm not doing it by myself, but it's also, I'm not supposed to do it by myself. You should have input too. So it helps me not to just decide how to do everything without your input too. So.
Okay, so that gives us kind of the first two key points about how moms and dads can partner on this. Let me pause here. We got one more point, but if you are watching on YouTube or Facebook, we'd love to get some questions, and they could be questions about moms and dads partnering, or they could just be questions more generally about homeschooling. Just take if you're on YouTube, in the chat box, type in your question. Would love to get some questions. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, in the comments, just type in your questions, and would love to answer a few questions. I think we're still waiting for our first. Well, no, we did get our first question. Thank you, Chris Harp. The question was, is Sean McDowell still doing MAVEN cologne ads? It's a little inside joke. No, he's not. But we are partnering with Sean on a live class in a couple of weeks. If you are not on the MAVEN email list and you want to stay up on the resources that we're offering, go to our website, maventruth.com. If you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, there'll be a box where you can put in your name and email address and get added to our list. And what we love to do is send out lots of free resources, keep you updated on the resources that MAVEN is offering. So go and do that. Okay, so anyway, send in your questions if you're watching live. All right, we have one last just practical step. And of course, this is not everything that we would say that you can do to partner, but this is an important one. And this is the idea of giving and getting breaks. I think that's one way that moms and dads can really partner. Whoever's taken the lion's share, right? I mean, it's rare for this to be split kind of 50-50. And so if mom or if dad is taking the lion's share of homeschooling, we need to make sure that there are breaks on a regular basis. And I would say some kind of daily break, as much as possible, maybe a weekly break, and then for moms and dads, I would include in that date nights. Mm-hmm. And so for daily breaks, it might just simply be when I get home. So in our situation, when I get home or I'm kind of off of work, sometimes it's just that mom needs to be able to leave the house and to go. And so I kind of run the show or whatever while mom goes out. And maybe it's just something as simple as going to the grocery store for an hour, getting away from the kids, the home, the chaos, and going out that way. Sometimes it's me encouraging you and saying, hey, today was a stressful day, particularly. And so why don't you grab a book, go down to the coffee shop, and get out of here for a little bit and take a break. So sometimes it's just the daily breaks that are important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, now, obviously, we're all in quarantine right now, so no coffee shops are open. Yeah. So, maybe it's just going to take a walk. Maybe it's you go lay down for 30 minutes before we try to do dinner. Also, sometimes we who are home with the kids can work in breaks even within our day. So we, especially when the kids were young, had a regular quiet time after lunch, and that was tempting for me to try to get things done while everyone was resting or reading and it was quiet, and then you go through the list of the million things you have to do. But it was oftentimes so much better if I also would rest during that time as well and re-energize myself for the second half of the day. And I think it's okay to admit that we need breaks, and we don't need breaks because our kids are horrible and we don't love being parents and all of these, our kids are driving us crazy, so we need breaks. I think
although that can sometimes be the reason. I mean, let's not take that totally off the table.
But I think we need breaks because what we're doing, it's hard. What we're doing is hard, and it's okay to say, this is hard. I love my kids. I love what I'm doing, or this isn't, in this time, this isn't what I necessarily asked for, or maybe life is stressful because income now has been cut. So whatever the reason, it's hard. Parenting is hard. And so it's okay to need a break from that. And break meaning like identifying things that help re-energize you, maybe help refocus you on what's important. Or maybe it is just going to the grocery store and by yourself and not having people constantly asking you for things and needing stuff, especially when they're young. You just feel like you're constantly being asked to do things. So all of that is okay, and it doesn't mean we don't love our kids, or it's because it's good. But most things that are good are hard. Yep. And so it's okay to say it's hard, and it's okay to need a break. And I do think for years, the weekly break that you would offer me was so vital to our survival as a family. And the funny thing is I would fight it. I would say, no, I'll stay home. I have way too much to do. I could not possibly take an evening off.
Well, yeah, I think that's probably one of the big roles that dads can play. If mom's taking the lion's share of the homeschooling load, one of the big roles that we can play as dads is to give moms permission, so to speak, to take that break, because moms don't give themselves permission to do that enough. And, oftentimes mom guilt is really strong, and there's always more work to be done. And so I have to constantly encourage my wife and remind her, no, you need a break. You can take a break. And then also, I think in kind of the weekly break, what we've tried to do as a general pattern, it doesn't happen every week, but to kind of carve out a time, and it's good if you do it the same time each week so you get into a habit of it, but have a weekly time where mom gets an extended break. And so this might be 4 or 5 hours. We built when I was like in grad school. I think we really got into a good habit of this when I was in grad school, because the seminary had a wives' evening every Tuesday night where the wives would gather for a couple hours of fellowship in small groups, and then the teaching time. And so that was a kind of a 2-hour program. Mm-hmm. But I would encourage Erin, hey, take the night off from dinner. So get out of the house at like 4 or 5. I'm going to take dinner. I'm going to do all the planning. I don't want you to do any of the planning on that. I'll do the planning. I will handle that. Get it off of your plate kind of mentally and emotionally. You go have dinner with a friend, or go to the coffee shop and relax, or even go get a meal by yourself, whatever you need, and then go to your evening gathering, fellowship afterwards. If you want to go to dessert afterwards, come home at 10 or 11, and get that extended break. And we were able to do that once a week in a really good rhythm.
Yeah, I think that especially the dinner break was a big deal. I would plan out, weekly menus of what we're making, and I'd grocery shop off of that. But having a day off of making dinner, and yeah, you would get upset with me if I would try to plan dinner on your night, because let's be honest, when you were in charge of dinner, well, that's how you discovered Denny's had kids eat free. If you buy an adult, okay. It was like 3 kids got to eat free.
You're really throwing me under the bus here, honey. I mean, let's talk about my grilling skills. You
are good at barbecuing. But
good.
But and I wasn't allowed to give my opinion on that. I in jest, I wasn't allowed to give my opinion. But I just you were just like, I'm gonna take care of it. Go. And you don't worry about dinner. I'm going to handle dinner, and just go and take a break. That was and has always been such a gift. And again, I fought you, especially in the beginning. Sorry about that. I really did fight you so much. But it ended up being and has been such a good good thing for us.
Yeah.
And date nights can be a part of that, those regular breaks too.
Yeah. Date nights are huge. Okay. All right. We've done a lot of talking here. Hopefully that's been helpful for you in terms of thinking through how do moms and dads partner. And just because one person is doing a greater percentage of the work doesn't mean that there isn't a real partnership there. And this is where moms and dads have to talk and really get expectations out on the table and then work through those things.
Yeah, if you in your marriage don't have the habit of talking through things, then this is an opportunity to create that habit and just say, now is the perfect time. You don't have so many things vying for your schedule. So why not make it a habit on maybe Sunday nights are good before you start the week to sit down and communicate the week ahead, what you're frustrated about with each other, how you feel about something. But if you haven't been in the habit of doing it, why not start the habit now and make it something that in your marriage you start talking about the things that you need to talk about and getting on the same page, reminding yourselves you're on the same team.
Okay. Hey, all right. We said we'd do some giveaways of this fantastic book, A Practical Guide to Culture, Helping the Next Generation Navigate Today's World. So I'm actually going to give out to, or I'm going to choose a winner right now. I'm going to give it out to the person who sent in the first serious question, and that was Daniel Viveros. So Daniel, if you are watching right now, I think you're watching on Facebook Live, go ahead and DM me your address, and we will send this book out to you today, all right? And now we're going to take your question. Here's Daniel's question. Daniel says, we have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and are new to homeschooling, plus we are starting off with classical education. What are some tips on keeping track or recording growth within those goals? Do both or just one? So taking our goals, what are ways we kind of track growth? And how do we know if we're meeting those goals?
Wow, I'm just thinking, Daniel, you have a 3 and a 1-year-old and you're already, you know what type of education you're going to do and you're already thinking of this. So you're already way ahead of where we were, for sure.
Yeah.
That's good though. It's so good you're thinking about it now. And thinking about assessment. I think, so keeping track or records of growth. So I think that's going to be you and your wife on a regular basis, just kind of taking a pulse of where your family's at. So right now you have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So your conversations are going to be about, what your kids are like, what your 3-year-old's able to sit through as far as reading right now, and what was a good book, what are good books that she or he seems to be drawn to, and that sort of thing. And it seems like she's really struggling with sharing right now with her younger sibling, and so this is something we really want to focus on. So maybe it's going to be not only having conversations with her about sharing and saying, hey, we're a family, and so we share things, and having these types of conversations with her. Maybe it's also coming together and saying, okay, how can we help her work on this? Okay, we're gonna have cousins over and make her share even more. And so it's these kinds of conversations that, again, it might sound trivial, but this is how we evaluate, and this is how we stay on the same team on where our kids are at. And as they get older, there are gonna be conversations of so-and-so is falling behind in this subject, and they're not keeping up with their work. I'm completely frustrated. Do you have ideas? How are we gonna tackle this together? Talking through things that they love, how you can encourage it. So 3 and 1-year-old, it's going to be a lot of conversations about probably discipline stuff. For sure, when our kids were little, date nights, a lot of the conversation was about discipline, what was working, what wasn't working, what Can we read stuff together? What could we do?
That might be maybe that'd be a good live stream, to do a live stream on discipline and talking through discipline issues, because discipline is actually a very important piece when you've got your kids at home all the time, when you're homeschooling. I think, it's a great question, Daniel. I think the challenge is, look, if you only look at education, and I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm saying I think a lot of modern Americans look at education only through an academic lens, and you have, it's actually an easier way to evaluate, where it's like, well, this test score or this grade or this SAT score, it makes it a little easier to do that evaluation. But as I've been kind of thinking through this question, I think when you look at our goals, because the goals are going to be the way that you evaluate. It's not, you're dealing with a subject that's much more complex than a math score. You're dealing with the human person. So the evaluation is going to be more challenging, and it's not going to be as black and white as we sometimes want those things. And so I think a lot of our evaluation is just through conversation. And it's in our own development, our own view of a human person and what a human person should be. So for instance, when it comes to, let's take something like moral development and virtue in our kids. We have been able to have conversations about how, a couple of our kids are very strong in the virtue of courage. Like, they have the kind of courage where we've seen examples of them stand up under peer pressure, right? When there's pressure put on them, they didn't back down, they didn't shift their position or things like that. Whereas three of our other kids struggle more in the area of courage. And so it's just a kind of an evaluation, just our assessment of what we've seen and experienced. I think when it comes to something like the love of learning, where this would be under the intellectual development, one of our sub-goals is the love of learning. That's stuff that when we see one of our kids pick up a book on their own, or pick up a book on a subject that we're not in that subject in terms of our homeschool curriculum, when they're reading on their own without any prompting, without any incentive, any of that then becomes something that becomes a piece of evaluation, where we see that and we go, okay, that helps us to see that we're meeting some of those goals. But I would say that evaluation process is not always clear cut. It's a little messier. And then in particular, it also is going to coincide with the ages that your kids are at. And so this just, I think, requires, and this is again where moms and dads can really partner, is that there's a lot of conversation between moms and dads in terms of, hey, what are we seeing in our kids? What are the areas of growth that are really encouraging?
What are they weak in and need encouragement in? Like the example of the 3-year-old sharing, that's a typical struggle for a 3-year-old who has a younger sibling, is sharing. And so, it's talking through the character things, or maybe it isn't sharing. Maybe the 3-year-old's just super bossy and wants to run the show. So then, so we need to work on that. And then of course these things will grow the older they get. But I think, thinking outside the box of how you assess your kids is a big thing. And the moral stuff, the work ethic, these should all be a part of how we're assessing our kids and figuring out how can we nurture the good in them, and how can we hold each other accountable to not focus on the things that aren't as important, but keep our focus on the things that are most important.
Just another thought occurred to me. Sometimes so for instance, knowing Christian truth and theology and scripture is vital to our educational purposes, because we think the Bible is an area of knowledge. It gives us knowledge of reality. So when we hear a kid give an insight, so for instance, if they've heard someone say something, or we're watching the news and they start questioning an idea that's coming through the screen, or a movie, and they're able to pick up on false ideas or secular ideas, that becomes not a planned evaluation, but an unplanned evaluation where we see that emerging in their lives, and then we're able to say, okay, we're seeing the fruit of what we've wanted to cultivate. Okay, great question, Daniel, and make sure you DM me so that we can get you a copy of A Practical Guide to Culture.
And sorry, side note, you mentioned classical education, and I don't know if you know, but the classical education movement just in this last couple years has come up with a test similar to the SAT and ACT that is for classically educated kids. And so they're offering this now as a way for classical educated kids to have an assessment that isn't the SAT and ACT, because of course those tests are typically reflective of the public school system and what they're doing there. So just side note, you have a few years before you're doing high school, but I think that's a good development in the classical education world.
Okay, we're gonna try to get to 2 more questions. We're gonna go a little over time on this live stream. This is a quick question. This is from Brenda, formerly Brenda Farrell, who actually used to be in our junior high youth group when I was a junior high pastor in Southern California. Now she's a parent. That means you're old, honey. You are old. Okay, Brenda said, hey, missed much of this today. Will you be saving and posting it for later viewing? Absolutely. The live stream will be available. The recording of the live stream will be available on the MAVEN YouTube channel. So if you just go to YouTube and search for MAVEN Truth, or search for the MAVEN YouTube channel, you'll find the live stream in our videos there. In fact, you can go back and watch last week's as well, which is a great conversation really with Erin and Cindy Rollins on homeschooling. Okay, we're going to take one last question here. This comes from Jason Smith. That name sounds familiar. I think I might know that person. But Jason Smith asks a really good question. He says, do you ever play to each other's strengths by dividing up teaching subjects? For example, wife is stronger at science, so she teaches science. Husband is stronger at math, so he teaches math.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we've gotten before too. And the answer is yeah. If you can do that, that's really a blessing to be able to do, to divide up subjects that maybe one spouse is more excited about than the other. For example, I mean, what we've done once our kids got into junior high, obviously you're teaching apologetics, you've studied philosophy more than I have, so you like teaching logic. So once the kids are in junior high, I say to you, okay, it's your job to teach them logic. So you guys figure it out. So the kids, have to coordinate with you. You've even, when 2 of our kids who are similar grades were, I think, in junior high or early high school, but you just opened it up and did a class at church for whatever homeschool kids wanted to. And since you were already teaching our 2 kids logic, you said, well, just whoever wants to come can come. That was fun. So absolutely, if one parent has a skill or a passion or whatever that they want to teach the kids, then that should, the parent, of course, should do that. And and I'm thinking too of if they have skills of plumbing and mechanics and like all of these things, the parent should say, hey, this is something I want to pass on to my kids. And that should be a regular part of life with kids. Again, your picture of education is much bigger than a worksheet or a workbook or curriculum. And so if dad is good at fixing cars, if mom is good at putting things together, gardening, I mean, whatever, then this should be, I mean, that's so fun to teach your kids things that you love, you're good at. So absolutely. And if you can work it out as parents, to come together and do that, that would be awesome.
Skill knowledge is an important piece of knowledge. Not all knowledge is kind of propositional knowledge that gets down on a worksheet, but learning how to use your hands to fix things, to do whatever it might be, whether it's on cars or gardening or all that, we view that as part of education. And so with some of the yard work or gardening, I think one of the ways you can do this is bring your kid with you. I think that's one thing that I've been able to do in my work is I'm doing a lot of talks on theology and philosophy and apologetics and worldview and culture. And so one of the ways that I see myself teaching that to my kids is I have the freedom to bring my kids to those events. And so our kids have traveled with me a lot throughout the years, and I see that as part of the homeschooling process, and that's kind of the subject those are subjects I take the lead on. So really, the answer is yes on that. But